Performance Modding here, and in today's video I will be showing you how to use Substance Painter to add custom specular maps, which add the door and the where maps to your mod for Farming Simulator 19. Before we begin, we'll need a couple of things from the Vortex Design website. This will allow us to use Substance Painter for all the Farming Simulator 19 stuff that we need to do. Now that we're on the Vortex Design website, we'll need to come here and download all of these things. So click on all of these, download them, and then save them to wherever you want on your computer, and then we'll continue on the video. Once you have them all downloaded, we need to extract them so they have their own files. So let's do that now. Now, if you have WinRAR, you can do it so that they all extract into their own files. Otherwise, you can just extract them all and they can all be here. Doesn't really matter. Now, we need to go back into Substance Painter. We'll close this out. So we can actually import everything. We'll come with a file, import resources, add resources, navigate to where we have our files located, which in my case would be documents, modding, FS19, Substance Painter. Now we need to add all of these in. So to do that, we'll come here, click on this folder, and add the layer. Come back up here to resources, come back in, go a folder out, go into dot, do all of these files, then come back in again and do the export and presets. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't do this Giants Engine 8.0.0. We had to do that a different way, which I'll show you here in a sec. So after we have all these imported into this area, you want to come down here to import your resources to and select shelf. After doing that, hit import. After importing those, now we need to add the Giants Engine 8.0.0 file. So to do that, we need to do that in a little bit of a different way. Now we're back in this area. We'll come up to Giants Engine 8.0.0. Double click into that, and we'll have this single file here. Now we also have to come. Now we also need to come into where you installed Substance Painter. Come up into Resources, Shelf, Algorithmic, Templates. Then we'll need to drag this over so we can have both of these open. Now just copy this file into this area. After we do that, we'll need to restart Substance Painter. Now that we've restarted Substance Painter, if we go to File, New, you can see that in the template we now have the Giants Engine 8 option. But we'll come back to that later, as we first need a 3D model to work with in Substance Painter. So for that, we'll now switch over to Blender and I'll show you how to set that up. Now that we're in Blender, you'll notice a very simple model. Some of you may also actually recognize this as being a bulldozer that Ada Modding was working on. To start, we need to plan on the amount of touches that we're going to need. So with this model, as it's fairly simple, we have 2 touches we'll need. And in the objects, we have 5 objects, but between those 5 objects, we only have 2 touches. The blade, the door, and the dozer visual objects are all have the same texture. The window objects have their own different texture. We also need to know that while Substance Painter can work in UDIM workflow, which is generally what FS19 mods are done with, we need to basically port them back to their own, to a non-UDIM state. So if we come over here to the UV editor, you can kind of see that I've already done that ahead of time, as ADAP had already UDIM this model. So once you do that, and once it's all in this little block here, which is I would say, the origin block, we can then export this to an OBJ file. So we'll need to export it with basically all the objects that we need. So for that, we'll just name this as dozer.obj. Now that we've exported it, we can now go back over into Substance Painter. Back in Substance Painter, we'll go File, New, Giants Engine 8 for the template, come up to File, go into the bulldozer, and hit the OBJ file. Then hit OK. Now that we've opened our model in Substance Painter, now we can start to get to work on it. One of the first things that we'll want to do is actually do a bake of the mesh maps. So to do this, we'll go to Edit, Bake Mesh Maps, and then deselect everything except for the AO, which is ambient occlusion, and the curvature. Now in this project, just with how I have it set up, I'm going to want to come to ambient occlusion, self-occlusion, and only do the same mesh name. And I'll have to do this for both of these. This is just to make sure that the ambient occlusion doesn't get messed up. Normally, leaving this to always is perfectly fine. So once we have that, we'll hit Bake Selected Textures. This usually takes a couple of seconds up to a couple of minutes depending on the mesh and how many different textures you have to do. Click OK, and the next thing that we'll have to do is come down to Smart Materials, and then up here we can search for a farming simulator, which would basically just make this to where only what we require will be in there. Correction to that, we'll need to search for giants in order to get what we need. Now as you can see, the only things we have in there are the giant smart materials which we'll actually be using. For the most part, we'll use the leftmost and the rightmost. The leftmost being the dot map and the rightmost being where map. So in order to apply these, all we need to do is just basically click on these and then drag them over to our model. So for the dot mask, I usually do it 3 different times just to make it thicker and more pronounced. The wear mask I usually only tend to do once, but that in my workflow I might add it multiple times just depending on what we need to do. So let's add the dot smart material one time, just so we can see how it looks. As you can see, it changes here, but it only changes this. It's not applied to our window. That's because it does it based on the textures. So we also need to drag it over to our glass. Now, just with how this model is set up, you can see there's some stretching. So I probably would actually do a little bit of custom making on it, which we would also have to do anyways, because as you can see, we have it inside, but we don't want it inside. So to kind of remove these, what we'll have to do is come over here to our dot mask, right click on it, and add a white mask or a black mask. This allows us to paint over areas that we either want to add or remove the dot from. The same can be done with the whale. So if we do a white mask, basically what we'll be doing is painting it so we will be removing from select areas, whereas a black mask you'd be painting to actually add into those areas. So let's go ahead and add a white mask. As you can see off the bat, we don't see any difference either on either of the touches. So let's select window, and then we'll come over here and then paint over the spot that we want to remove. Mostly I'll probably remove it from this door right here just because it has a lot of stretching on it. Now sometimes you also will need a manually create a paintware or a paint mask, but that can also be done separately. But in my case, I just forgot to add the white mask into the window texture. So let's go ahead and start by doing this now. As you can see, it is already actually removing it, and it's doing what we need, but with how this UV is laid out, it might just be a better idea just to not even actually worry about any dot away on this texture itself. So we'll just remove this from it. However, if we go to the dozer, you can see that it's on the inside. We don't want it on the inside. So we'll click on dozer, come up here to where we have our paintable mask, and then start removing it. As you can see, it's removing it from here, and this, just due to the nature of it, can take a little bit of time. So I'm going to go on ahead and actually do this off screen. Now that I've done that, I'm actually going to come over here and duplicate this way so I can thicken the actual dot layers once we actually have it on our mod for the game. So I'll do this, I'll duplicate it twice, just so that we can thicken it up. And it still has that same shader mask that we basically applied and got rid of inside of the cabin. Next, I also want to come up here and do the wear mask for it, so I'll just drag that over to this now. Now, I'm also actually going to kind of hide these dot layers just so we can see how the wear itself looks. Now, from a file, it doesn't really look all that good. Especially if we take a look like right here, I mean, no one's gonna see that much wear on one thing. So what we want to do for this is over here on the right, you'll see that we have the wear mask itself and then the shaded mask wear. We want to click on this little image on the wear mask. Then we'll come down to underneath sharpen where we have this mask editor. We'll click on that. And then this will bring up an entire different thing down here. What we want to do is find this curvature opacity. We'll change this down to a lower value. This lower value will also kind of like change just how much of it is actually applied. As you can see, when I go lower, you see less and less of the wear being actually put on. Sometimes one can be good, but most of the time that's going to be too much. I'll probably leave this probably about 0.6. But I still think this up on this on the exhaust that it's probably a little bit too much. So we'll come back to this shaded mask layer, right click, and add a white mask so we can remove it. So I'll probably just do something like this, just remove it from this part of the pipe. That seems a little bit more reasonable. Now this will also have wear inside the cab, so I'll also remove it from inside the cab as well. So I'll do that and come back. Okay, now that I've done that, we're basically just about finished. So the next part, we need to come up to File, Export Textures, and then in the settings page, since I didn't do anything to the window, I'll just deselect that. Come over here to the output template, click on this, and then scroll up until we find Giants Engine 8 Vehicle. This is just because what we are doing in this one is just for a vehicle. If you have something for like color select, which personally I haven't found anything different on yet, usually Giants Engine 8 Vehicle works just fine. Next, we want to come up here and go to and select our output folder. So for that, we'll basically come to basically where we just came from. Come up here, bulldozer, textures, select a folder. Then all we're going to do is click on export. Once it finishes exporting, we can just go ahead and hit cancel, as it's now exported. Next, after that, we'll come up here into our main file of or into the main folder of our mod. Open it in Giants Editor. Now that it's open in Giants Editor, we'll come up here to basically one of our objects. In this case, this is the texture that we need. Come over here to our gloss map and change that to the file that we basically just created with Substance Painter. As you can see, it's kind of in here, it looks kind of all convoluted. But we also need to convert this, as we didn't do it prior, so it's still technically a PNG file, but we need it to be a DDS file to be read by the game. So we'll just let it auto convert, though I usually would just do it myself. I'd probably do it in something like Photoshop or one of the other image editors. Now that's done, we can just exit out of this. And as you can see, it's already actually applied some of the dirt. So I'm going to hide the selected objects from view. Come up here to my vehicles, toggle the dirt off, and also toggle the scratches off. There, so you can see now that that's what the clean object looks like. Toggle the dirt. Okay, now that makes sense of why the dirt didn't come back when I attempted to do that. So when doing the hiding the layers to check the wear and whatnot, make sure to re-enable those, otherwise it won't actually export the necessary dirt layers. So now that I've gone back and redid that again, and re-exported, now let's go back up into our scripts, vehicle, dirt, and set the dirt to 1. Which, as you can see, now actually applies the dirt. And as you can see, it actually looks pretty decent too. Like down here you have a pretty good concentration, which you'd probably expect for something that would have tracks on it, as this bulldozer will. Now, if we actually remove the dirt and add the scratches themselves, that also doesn't look half bad, and as you can see, it doesn't appear to affect anything really inside the cab. It might be a little bit that you missed, but you can always just go back in and take a look at that again. Now, if this is also too much, you can once again go back in, lower down that curvature opacity, or paint over areas you don't think should have it. But with that, that basically concludes our tutorial today. Thanks for watching.